You might be initially inclined to say that something from Big Finish was the first ever Doctor Who audio, so in that case, it would be Oh No It Isn't by Paul Cornell from the Bernice Summerfield range back in September 1998. But of course, at this point in time, Bernice Summerfield had recently been separated from Doctor Who entirely due to not being renewed by the BBC for the Virgin New Adventures. And even then, Oh No It Isn't is just an adaptation of the first Benny only V&A from a year earlier. In fact, the whole first series of Big Finish's Bernice Summerfield audios were just adaptations of the novels, so her first Big Finish original was not until December 2000 with The Secret of Cassandra by Gary Russell. But Big Finish are more widely known for their Doctor Who audio originals. Once they acquired the license for Doctor Who audios, their first release would be The Sirens of Time by Nicholas Briggs in July 1999, which would spur on the creation of the longest running sci-fi audio play series, concluding with The End of the Beginning by Robert Valentine in March 2021. But Nicholas Briggs, Gary Russell and their fellow writers did not begin with Big Finish. Long before they officially created Doctor Who audios, they were simply fans creating Doctor Who stories with unlicensed characters. These were called the audio visuals, and they began with The Space Whale by Gary Russell in December 1984. However, The Space Whale was more of a pilot story, with co-founder of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, Stephen Payne, voicing the Doctor. Of course, with Nick Briggs being Nick Briggs, by the time the Time Ravagers came around, he voiced the Doctor for the rest of their stories over the next few years. But the audio visuals weren't completely lost to Doctor Who canon. As those behind the audios came to write for Big Finish, almost all of their audio visuals have aspects, characters and stories lifted or referenced or used in the monthly adventures and even Doctor Who magazine comics. Even in the Sirens of Time, there are references to the Time Ravagers, Conglomerate, the Destructor Contract, and Subterfuge, all of course Nick Briggs stories, but even beyond references, the Mutant Phase, Sword of Orion, Minuet in Hell, and Cuddlesome got direct adaptations in the Monthly Adventures and the Fifth Doctor Adventures, with Endurance even getting a sequel in Frozen Time. Vilgreth got a close remake as Last of the Titans, and the Destructor Contract and Subterfuge got more loose adaptations in the Fourth Doctor Adventures. The audio Deadfall got a V&A adaptation by Gary Russell, and Russell also adapted an unproduced audiovisual script as the V&A Legacy. Nicholas Briggs's Doctor would also appear in comic form in the Doctor Who magazine issue 173 comic Party Animals in 1991 as a future incarnation of the Doctor alongside his companion Rhea. Briggs's Doctor would come to be known as Fred, due to his stories in the more well-known fan productions from BBV. BBV produced 2 audio adventures in time and space which featured the Wanderer, or Fred, in the 1998 story Cyber Hunt by Nicholas Briggs and 1999's Vital Signs by Tim Sayward, depicting this Doctor as an amnesiac version of the audio visuals Doctor. Cyber Hunt even got a novelization in 2021 by Callum Philpott. And that's not even mentioning the other fan series from Nigel Fairs called Pisces, which shared actors and continuity with the audio visuals and had a couple of stories also adapted by BBV in audio form, or that BBV also loosely adapted a couple of audio visuals into their insanely bonkers Stranger movies. This world of Fred, the Nth Doctor, the Wanderer, whatever you want to call him, is insane, and I will never be able to get my head around it even after researching it. But the key takeaway from these though is that they're not really canon. They're almost entirely unlicensed and can't really claim to be the first of their kind, especially since the audio visuals weren't even sold commercially. But we can do better. Enter the world of radio plays and soundtracks. The first of these that we could consider would be The Daleks from April 1966. Despite its title, it's actually an abridged version of the final episode of The Chase, narrated by David Graham and released on 7-inch vinyl. This was really a one-of-a-kind release, as nothing like this would be released until October 1979 with Genesis of the Daleks. Again, it was an abridged soundtrack of Genesis of the Daleks and was released on vinyl and cassette. The first unabridged soundtracks wouldn't come until July 1992 with the Macra Terror and the Evil of the Daleks, but importantly, these are not original stories. They are just the original TV serials released in audio form with linking narration. Not exactly a claim for the first Doctor Who audio story either. So, radio plays. The first story put to radio was also not original. It was simply a narrated broadcast of Daleks' Invasion Earth 2150 AD and aired in November 1966. But if you jump to October 1976, you'll find Exploration Earth, The Time Machine by Bernard Venables, an educational Radio 4 drama featuring Tom Baker's Fourth Doctor. The only caveat being is that it wasn't released commercially until July 2001. Even then, other later radio plays like Slip Back and The Paradise of Death saw cassette releases in the 80s and 90s, but the key thing here is that Exploration Earth aired before all of those. So this must be it. It's a lesser known audio for sure, but it's made for audio, and its canonicity is murky, but I see no reason as to why we can't consider Exploration Earth as the first Doctor Who audio. What's that I hear you say? There was a story released commercially literally a couple months before Exploration Earth aired? Doctor Who and the Pescatons by Victor Pemberton was a direct-to-vinyl audio adventure released in August 1976, a truly one-of-a-kind release. It wasn't a radio play, nor was it a soundtrack, it was direct-to-vinyl, something that has never been done since for any Doctor Who release, over 20 years before anything from Big Finish. The closest thing to Doctor Who and the Pescatons would be the radio plays, but the first commercial release for one of those wasn't until April 1986 with Slipback, but that was even over a year from the Space Whale, so discounting soundtracks, Doctor Who and the Pescatons can hold its head high with its claim of the first Doctor Who audio story. At the length of an average New Who episode, Doctor Who and the Pescatons, written by Victor Pemberton, writer of the second Doctor serial Fury from the Deep and heavily based on ideas from that serial, sees the fourth Doctor Tom Baker and Sarah Jane Elizabeth Sladen encounter an advanced race of humanoid sharks, led by the merciless Zor, voiced by Bill Mitchell. It was recorded shortly after season 13 had wrapped and can thus be set between that and season 14, although it wasn't even a BBC production, instead coming from Argo Records but still officially licensed from the BBC. I can't say enough how unique this story is, and if you wish to experience it yourself, it can be picked up pretty easily as a standalone CD or as part of the BBC Radio Episodes collection, although of course not being a radio play itself. Victor Pemberton also novelised the story in 1991, which itself was released very recently in audio, read by John Culshaw. So there you have it. Technically, it was the Daleks in April 1966, but really it was Doctor Who and the Pescatons in August 1976, unless for whatever reason you don't count LPs, in which case I guess it was Exploration Earth, but that really shouldn't count as it wasn't released for another 25 years. So really it was Slip Back, although of course that was only written for radio, so I suppose it could be Big Finish's Oh No It Isn't, but then that really isn't Doctor Who or an original audio, so then perhaps it's the Sirens of Time. But even then, the Monthly Adventures pretty much canonises some of BBV and the audio visuals, so maybe it's the Space Whale or the Time Ravagers, but really it's none of those, and it's definitely Doctor Who and the Pescatons. Thank you for your time.